I think one of the greatest races in the world, the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb. And I'd love to keep it interactive. So as I'm going through there, if you want to jump in, if something pops into your head in terms of a question, virtually raise your hand, and we'll try to answer those questions on a timely basis. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So just a quick background on me. Why am I doing this? Why did I even write a book on Pikes Peak? Well, I've been racing for quite a while, road racing, and I'd always liked Pikes Peak. I always thought it was an interesting race, looked like fun, but it was never anything that I really visualized myself doing, because traditionally this race has been it was a dirt road. And I'm an asphalt racer, and so it never really hit my radar until they paved it. Pikes Peak was paved in its entirety by the end of 2011 is when they completed the paving, and so the 2012 race was the first one that was entirely paved. And at that point, I actually had the skills that would lend themselves to racing up Pikes Peak, and got some encouragement from some different people, and went ahead and entered, and thought it would be maybe a one-time only experience. But I sit here 8 years later, having done it, I guess 7 times now, and it's kind of gets in your blood. And I think a lot of people who get involved with the race, whether they're racing in it, crewing, being officials, or just being fans, they can attest to the fact that this gets in your blood, and it's rather addicting. And so that's my background, and kind of where all this came from. What really makes this whole thing very unique, and very different from other races that at least I get to participate in, is that you get to race head to head against some of your racing heroes, and full pro racers. And that's what's really interesting about Pikes Peak. It's a mix of factory sponsored pro racers and more grassroots racers all together. And so you end up having the opportunity. I like to equate this to like a pro sports fantasy camp, except this is real. The fantasy camps are like, oh, okay, I get to go on the baseball diamond, or play football with some of my heroes, but you're not really competing. This is really competing, and you're doing it with your heroes. So it's really a unique thing. And so get a chance to compete with some folks like Romain Dumas. This is Reese Millen from New Zealand, Travis Pastrana. Some of these guys are just amazing, and you get to see why they've made such a great career out of it. They're generally very, very approachable, nice guys, and immensely skilled, obviously, because they do this for a living. So that's kind of a quick background of what's interesting about the race, why I kind of got into it personally, and why I think a lot of people do. But why write a book about it? The first year that I entered the race, I decided that this is a very dangerous race. It kind of takes things to a whole different level beyond what you would normally expect to encounter on a road racing circuit, which is what I've been used to. That there's no real margin for error. People ask, where is a good place to go off on Pikes Peak, and there's nowhere. You have a choice between, at the bottom, if you go off, you're going to hit some rocks or trees. Midway up to the top, up at the summit, you're probably going to have a little bit of an airborne period before you strike anything. So either way, it's not good. There are really no good places to go off. And so what I decided to do before doing this the first time was to really prepare. And I prepared for really for the year leading up to the race, as much as I possibly could. I drove it in streetcars up and down. Went up and down the mountain with my wife driving and me logging every single turn and making course notes. Even did video simulations of it. And so I thought I was super prepared. However, and why do we have this picture of this car skidding out of control and about to go off the side? Well, sad to say, that's me. And that's my very first run at speed up Pikes Peak. So the very first year, very first practice run, this is me skidding and heading toward oblivion, realizing that things come at you a little bit quicker and they look a little bit different at over 100 miles an hour versus the 20 or 30 miles an hour that we're all accustomed to going up the mountain in a private car. So uh, so I made a huge mistake there on my very first day. Fortunately, I didn't wreck the car, but it was darn close and it got my attention. And so I thought, with all the preparation that I did, and this still happened to me despite being really prepared, um, maybe it would be a good idea to kind of pay it forward to the next generation of folks who would race up Pikes Peak and write about my experiences and provide a guide to how to do this quickly and safely. And that's really where the book started. Was just saying I'm going to do a book about all 156 turns, what it's like to race up there, where you need to be careful, that sort of thing. It was really more targeted at racers. However, very quickly in the process of writing the book, it morphed into what it's become today, which is really more entertainment and interesting for fans and not just racers. I think the racers have found it interesting, but also people who might never get the chance to race up Pikes Peak, and it gives them the next best thing, a view into what it's like being in a race car going up Pikes Peak, a lot of the stories that have taken place along the way, and we'll talk about a few of those today. Being a unique race, it attracts unique people, and they have unique stories. And I think you get a lot of interesting characters. So that's really kind of where all this came from. So why don't we just dive into kind of what we go over in the book, and thanks to Mike for his kind words of introduction about the book. So in addition to it taking you up all 156 turns, it kind of goes into the history of the race at the beginning, and really the history of the road itself, the Pikes Peak Highway. Um, what a lot of people don't realize is before the highway was actually built, there was a carriage road that went up to the summit of Pikes Peak, and it was originally built for carriages, horses and carriages, if you can imagine that. And you can see kind of what that road would have looked like. And this was this picture is in 1901, and you'll see there's no horses in front of this carriage. This is actually a horseless carriage in 1901. A couple of gentlemen from Denver named Yount and Felker decided, well, wouldn't it be interesting to go up this carriage road in a horseless carriage and see if we can do this actually in a car? This is 1901, so you got to remember that cars were fairly new at that point and a novelty. And thinking about driving up, not just up a 14,000 foot mountain, because driving up Pikes Peak in that car in the picture today would be a real feat, but doing it up the carriage road, even more so. And you can see what the carriage road looked like above tree line. It gets even hairier. It's really just a little ledge on the side of the mountain going up to the summit. They had all of 3.5 horsepower in this vehicle, but they did make it to the summit. It took 24 hours, but they got up to the summit, which was a major feat, and that was the first car ever to summit Pikes Peak. And what's interesting is that I think Pikes Peak has a long history of various methods of propulsion being used by vehicles going up there. And what's interesting about this being 1901, this was actually a steam-powered car. So very interesting, but steam power is great. It's as we all know from science class, steam provides a lot of power for a lot of different things, a lot of torque, and clearly it was sufficient to get these gentlemen almost 120 years ago up to the summit of Pikes Peak.
Hey, Chris.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so at that time, would it have been easier going up or coming back down?
I'll bet it would have been a lot heavier going down, because if you look at this car, I don't see any big brakes on this. So
Yeah, that's why I asked. Yeah.
and as we all know, most of the tourist incidents today are on the way down, not on the way up. And I've got an interesting story about that in a few slides here. So hold that thought. It's I learned something interesting about that. But yeah, I guess their journey was only half done once they got to the summit. So fast forward a little bit, and up to around 1915, Spencer Penrose, who founded the Broadmoor Hotel and was one of the leading citizens of Colorado Springs, decided that, well, we could get a lot more people going up to the summit of Pikes Peak if we made this more of a quote unquote highway than just a carriage road. Not many people had the fortitude of Falker and Yount back in 1901 to go up the carriage road. But if you make it a lot wider and smoother, as you can see here as they're building the highway, you can make it open to a lot of folks. And in fact, he would run cars and buses up from Pikes Peak, or from the Broadmoor up Pikes Peak. And it became a commercial enterprise. It became a toll road, and has been ever since. And so this has been accessible for over 100 years to anybody who wants to pay the toll can go up Pikes Peak. And so clearly this was a huge undertaking, and you can see they had some specially constructed trucks that were used for building this highway. But again, you can see that the driving surface is far superior to what it was when it was a carriage road. It by and large follows the original route of the carriage road, but again, much easier to navigate. So that was the building of the highway, and a lot of people tend to think that the highway was built and then there was some kind of a gap between then and when the race started, and there really wasn't much of a gap at all. Being a very smart businessman and marketer, Spencer Penrose decided that to attract people out to this brand new toll road and get them to come out and hopefully stay at the Broadmoor and pay the toll to go up to the top. What better way to do that than by having a motor race up there? And so the highway opened in 1915, and then here's the race starting right away in 1916, going up to the summit. And it was very well marketed. This is the cover of the very first program. He invited a lot of the greatest racers of the day to come and do it. Donated a very valuable trophy that you see a picture of here as enticement to people to come up and race. And kind of the rest is history. So this has been a big race since day one. It's not like it took time to build up. One question I've got on here is, again, thinking about the first race being in 1916, what races are actually older than this in the U.S.? And does anybody want to take a shot at that?
Raise your hand if you want to take a shot. I'm not seeing any hands, Chris.
Okay. Well, the one that's older than this in the U.S. is and that's still going is the Indy 500, and it's just a little bit older than the Pikes Peak International Hill Climb, but not much. And so these are the two oldest races in the United States, and really there wasn't a whole lot of motor racing that's older than this period. So quite the history, and like I said, it's been a big race since day one back in 1916. Things have clearly changed a little bit. since 1916. The equipment is obviously different. Like I said, the road is has clearly changed over the years, but the whole idea of getting from the start line up to the summit as quickly as possible has not changed. The degree of risk that drivers take is still incredibly high. Although you can see in this picture, boy, the risks that they took back then were much higher. They didn't have things like luxuries we have today, like harnesses and seatbelts and airbags and things like that cars have today. So I can't even imagine what it was like for these guys racing up in the early days of Pikes Peak. Like I said, it was a big race from the very beginning, and it has attracted the best of the best of the motorsports world. And this just shows a few of the luminaries who have raced up here over the years, and we'll talk about a few of them here. There's a mentioning the Indy 500 again. There's a great shared history between the Indy 500 and Pikes Peak that has continued really to this day, and we'll talk a little more about that. But the people who have won on Pikes Peak are people who have won in every other form of motorsport you can imagine, from Indy 500 to Formula One to sprint cars to stock cars to World Rally to MotoGP to all kinds of to Le Mans, of course. Every different level that you can imagine. You've got champions coming from all those series to compete on Pikes Peak. So just a few stats for hopefully most of you have had the opportunity to drive up Pikes Peak, if not race. And even driving up Pikes Peak at a leisurely pace, it's quite the road. It's just short of 12 and a half miles long from the start line to the summit. 156 turns along the way, getting you up to 14,115 foot summit, which is an elevation gain of just below 5,000 feet. So you're going up a lot in a short period of time. And so you're going up at an average of a 7% grade, which is a pretty steep grade on average. It gets a little bit steeper than that at places. I think the maximum grade it gets to is about 10%. And believe it or not, people have asked, are there some downhill sections going up? And there are. I can attest to that, having had my race car die on the way down, and people said, well, you could just coast it back down to the starting line. Not true. There's one particular spot that's rather difficult to coast it back up. So guardrails, interesting story here. People will say, well, the race isn't the same now, and they're right. It's not quite the same as it was when it was unpaved and there were no guardrails. When they paved it, and since they have put in some guardrails in some different places, and you'll see even in this slide, you'll see in the nearest turn there, the hairpin turn, you'll see a guardrail there. And people say, well, doesn't that make you feel a lot more comfortable racing up Pikes Peak? There's a lot less risk that if you were to brake a little bit too late, you're gonna get at least caught by the guardrail and not going to go off the edge. And my answer to people is, it's funny you should say that, because it seems like that should be the case, but it's really not. Anytime that I miss a braking point, and trust me, I've missed many braking points over the years, I'm always I'll tell you, in practice personally, I'm always really trying to push the edge and brake as late as possible into every corner. Over the years that I've competed, I've always kind of brought a knife to a gunfight, having a much lower powered car than my competitors. And so I figured the only way I could really compete was to get through the corners faster and get on the accelerator quicker. And that implies braking later and less than other people. It also makes it more fun. However, what I've always found when I've missed a braking point and I thought, oh, geez, I'm not going to make the turn, the guardrail is never there to save me. And you can see here in this picture where the guardrail is. And so one year I was racing up Pikes Peak, got done on race day, was at the summit and talking to one of the great competitors up there who's done it, about 30 times now. and talking to him about this. And I said, yeah, I said, what do you do for a living? And he said, well, I put guardrails in. I said, oh, interesting. He said, in fact, I put the guardrails in up here. And I'm like, okay, I got a beef with you. These guardrails are never in the right place for me when I miss a braking point. And he's like, well, we didn't put them in for you. We didn't put them in for racers. We put them in for the public, and we put them in to catch cars coming down, not to catch cars going up. And so you can kind of see that when you look at this picture and you see the guardrail there. It's set up to catch a car that misses a turn going down, not necessarily going up. Because again, the tourists are going very, very slowly going up. But let's say their brakes fail or something like that, they're gonna be very thankful for having a guardrail on the downhill side of these turns. So there's a little tidbit for you about guardrails on Pikes Peak. So like I said, it's a long course, and being a long course, and with 156 turns, we tend to break this down into thirds. There's a lower third, a middle third, and an upper third, and it makes it, I think, a little bit easier for fans and competitors and really everybody to digest and say, okay, I just need to learn a third at a time here. And so here's kind of what it looks like. You got the lower third here, and you can see plenty of turns. There are 68 turns on the lower third, so more than a third of the turns on the lower third in terms of the segmentation of it. I like to equate the lower third to being like you're on skis and you're doing either slalom skiing or tree skiing. You're going through the trees all the way here. It's got fantastic rhythm, and really most of the competitors will tell you that they like this lower section the best. It's fantastic. I'm absolutely in love with the lower section. I have been since the first time I drove it. It's got wonderful flow, and I think it feels faster than maybe it even is, because you've got the trees as reference points going up there. So it feels fast. It is fast. Just fantastic rhythm, and it's just a dream to drive. Then you get the second third. This looks a lot shorter, and it is. However, this is where a lot of the elevation gain is. So you'll see there's a lot of switchbacks here, a lot of hairpin turns going back and forth, back and forth. Again, you're gaining a ton of elevation during this section. And the primary part of this is what's called the W's. And you can see why when you look at the map here. You can see where you see the first leg, second leg, third leg, fourth leg of the W's. You see the road looks like W's because that's really the shape that it is. And then you get to the top section. I always say this is ironic. You see that the turns suddenly become very gradual, which means in race car parlance, very fast, extremely fast. A lot of these turns are approaching or even over 100 miles an hour, and that's during the turn, not in the straightaways between them. So incredibly fast turns, and this is where you get the really big drop-offs at the end of the second section, and then this entire third section. These are the turns you really don't want to go off on, because you're going to be have some probably need some FAA clearance, because you're going to be up in the air for a while before you hit anything here. So, but it's fantastic. It is extremely fast and just a ton of fun racing up this last section. You can see, even though this is considered to be a third of it, you're only talking about I think 35 turns here at the 41 turns at the last section here. So not a huge number of turns and incredibly fast. So Mike was talking earlier about the Unsers, and one of the great families to race on Pikes Peak over the years are the Unsers. And at the head of the class, I would say, for the Unsers is Bobby Unser, who's got an unbelievable record on Pikes Peak of 13 overall and class wins in a span of 30 years. And 30 years spanned the time between his first and his last win there, which is really incredible. So yeah, one of the great legends of Pikes Peak, a great character, had the pleasure of spending a lot of time with Bobby as I was working on this book. He was very gracious, very helpful, and he's probably the best storyteller I've ever met in my life. The stories he's got and the way he spins a tale is just amazing. One of the things that he says to this day is that he would not have won the Indy 500 three times, let alone once, without Pikes Peak. He never had Indy and IndyCar racing on his radar, which is amazing to think of now. When everybody thinks of Bobby Unser, they think of his amazing IndyCar career, one of the top drivers in history in IndyCar, and of course, winning the Indy 500 three times has only been done by a few folks. But his whole story is that all he ever wanted to do was race Pikes Peak and beat his uncle Louis's records up on Pikes Peak. He told him as a kid he was going to break his records, and sure enough, he did. And Bobby's a great example of somebody who, if you're determined enough to do something, you're going to do it. And that's really one of his big philosophies: is if you want something bad enough, you will get it and you will do it. How he ended up in Indy cars is interesting, and it is directly attributable to Pikes Peak. That on Pikes Peak, one of the IndyCar legends who raced on Pikes Peak was Parnelli Jones. He raced on Pikes Peak with Bobby, and he saw what a talented driver Bobby was, and he said, "I'm going to get you a test at Indy. I think you would do great at Indy." And Bobby initially pushed back significantly and said, no. That's I'm not an IndyCar driver. That's not anything that I'm looking at. I'm not sure that's anything I'd want to do. And Parnelli Jones was insistent and just went ahead, even I think without Bobby's permission, and set up a test for him and said, "You're coming to Indy. You're getting a test." And of course, the rest is history. Bobby was fast from the very beginning at Indy, it proves that a fast race car driver is a fast race car driver, whether or not he's in one form of motorsports or another. If he's truly talented like Bobby, he's going to be fast anywhere he goes. Bobby's brother, Louis Jr., was a perennial competitor in the stock car class on Pikes Peak, and he's the subject of this is my favorite photo ever of Pikes Peak. And this is Louis coming up, and you can see how close his right rear tire is to going off the side of the mountain. And that particular turn is a very long way down. I think it's probably about 700 feet down at that point. You would roll a lot of times, and you can see, he's right on the hairy edge. And even Bobby said, yeah, boy, he wouldn't ride with his brother. His brother took way more chances than he did. And this is one of Bobby's great quotes. He said, one time I'm riding down the mountain with his brother Louis, and I reached over and shut the car off and got out and told him, "I'm not going to ride with you. You're crazy." That's going down, and not even during the race. And so you can see the way he raced in the race, and that's how he was successful. Obviously, he was willing to take some chances that others perhaps weren't willing to take. I did mention Louis Sr., who was Bobby's uncle, and he's the subject of another great photo that we've got in the book, and one of my favorite photos. This is the old finish line on the summit, so you can see the timing banner there, and a bunch of folks from the U.S. Army and some officials there watching the finish of the race. And what's interesting about this photo, I'll throw it out there. Can anybody, if anybody wants to answer the question of what's really interesting about this photo? Anybody out there who might want to answer that?
He's going backwards.
Yes, exactly. He's going backwards. He's looking over his shoulder. And so I asked Bobby about this photo when one of the times I interviewed him. I'm like, "Well, what's the deal behind this?" And he said, "Oh, this is a good one." He said, "This is when he was coming up on the final turn. Uncle Louis looped the car around. He was going a little bit too fast, looped the car around, and it ended up pointing backwards. And of course, the quickest way he figured he could get across the finish line then was to find reverse, get it into reverse, and go as fast as possible across the finish line in reverse. And you can see all the dirt spitting up out of the rear tires here going backwards. He's gunning it and going across the finish line there. And what Bobby said that was really interesting, he said, he figures it took probably about 20 seconds for Uncle Louis to get the car back going into reverse and across the finish line here, and that he was probably fairly upset at this point when this happened. What Bobby didn't mention, and I followed up in looking at the records to see, did Louis actually win this year that he did this? He didn't. This actually wasn't one of his wins. He actually came second by less than 20 seconds. So I think, in this year he would have won if he hadn't looped it on the last corner, but that shows that the race is not over until you cross the finish line. And even then it's really not over until you shut the car down and get out of it. So that's just a great photo, I think, and just an amazing story about Pikes Peak. Speaking of legends on Pikes Peak, I think a lot of people are aware of the Unser legacy on Pikes Peak, but maybe fewer are aware of the fact that Mario Andretti ran on Pikes Peak 3 times and was the champion in 1969. And I was lucky enough to interview Mario for the book. He was also very gracious and gave me some great stories. And one of his quotes he gave me, he said, after winning, he said, "I swore I would never return. I had to take too many risks to win, and everything had to go just perfectly, and it was just too dangerous." And this is not an uncourageous guy. This is Mario Andretti, one of the greatest racers ever. And he just said, when he won it, he's like, "Okay, I'm done. Not doing this anymore. I've nothing more to prove on Pikes Peak." And he's been true to his word. But again, a great champion to have up Pikes Peak, and it was really Bobby Unser who brought him to Pikes Peak. Kind of how Parnelli Jones took Bobby to Indy. Bobby kind of returned the favor and talked Mario into coming to Pikes Peak. And to this day, when you talk to Mario, it's almost like it was yesterday when he was running up the peak. In terms of more recent legendary drivers, Romain Dumas is kind of our modern day perennial winner. He's won many, many times up here over the last 8 years. And he kind of puts this in interesting perspective. He likes to say, and he's a Le Mans champion as well as a multiple Pikes Peak champion. And he says, after Le Mans or Pikes Peak, you have Formula One in Monaco, you have Indy, Paris-Dakar Rally, maybe the Monte Carlo Rally, but there's not a whole lot more in terms of legendary races worldwide. So, and this is really backed up by a lot of the polls that are out there that consistently rank Pikes Peak not only in the top 10, but normally in the top 5 of races worldwide. And I think that's something a lot of people, particularly local to Colorado Springs and this area, don't realize is just how important this race is on a global basis. I mentioned that this race brings a great mix of folks, and one of the other great more recent champions who's won many times is Paul Dallenbach. He says this. He says, I love this race because it's still one where somebody can draw a dream up on a napkin and compete against a factory team, and that's what I love about it too. That's I think that's a great quote, and Paul has fared incredibly well as a grassroots style racer against a lot of these legends. One of the other kind of grassroots guys who's competed many times over the last several years is Aaron Kaufman of TV fame. He provided a lot of really insightful stuff when I talked to him, and a lot of stories from him in the book. But one of my favorite quotes is from him is, in racing, there are real consequences to your decisions, and race cars don't give you a pass. It's a great lesson. Really mature guy, amazing guy. And, I think one of the great racers who's come up here year after year and has gotten Pikes Peak in his blood over the last several years. So here's a photo. It may seem like random vehicles. These are all vehicles that have competed in various years up Pikes Peak more recently. And I put this up here for a particular reason, that there's something that these cars all have in common. Well, cars and truck, let's put it that way, all have in common that that might not be apparent to everybody. And any comments on what you see as a common thread across all these Pikes Peak race vehicles?
Fairing?
What's that?
The fairing?
What do you mean by that?
Well, I don't know what you call it, the race scoop on the back.
Yes, the wings on the back. Yes, excellent. Yeah, you'll see they all have these ridiculous looking wings on
And
the
I'm not
back.
the only one. And I'm trying to keep up, but you also had a couple other people do better than me. We had a couple of Matt and Ryan both got wings right.
All right. Okay. Yeah, different names, but yeah, it's the aerodynamic aids. Maybe we can put it that way. And the reason for that and why you have these really crazy looking wings, even on trucks, but really on pretty much every vehicle that goes up Pikes Peak, or really pretty much every successful one, has these huge wings and other aerodynamic aids on them. Any guesses as to why these wings are so much bigger on Pikes Peak race vehicles than other race vehicles? If you think about NASCAR or IndyCar or other things, these wings are way bigger than those. Thoughts on why they're bigger on Pikes Peak?
Going up to altitude, Chris.
You got it. Thin air. Yeah, it's thin air. Less air density, and so you require a lot more surface area on all of your aerodynamic devices in order to get the downforce that you need. And remember, I mentioned on the upper third of the mountain, that's the really high speed part of it. Well, that's where the air is the least dense. And when you're going around a corner at 100 miles an hour, you want to have some comfort that it's going to stay on the road. And so that's why you see these huge aerodynamic devices on pretty much every vehicle that goes up there. Besides that, they look cool. But and that's why I think a lot of Pikes Peak cars look super cool, because they got all these extra aero devices on them. All right, so when you're late for practice, what do you do? Well, when we practice up on Pikes Peak, we typically have to cross through the toll gate at 2:30 or 3 o'clock in the morning, and be ready to start running about 5 a.m., 5:15, something like that, at first light, because we have to hand the highway back to the general public at usually 8:30 or 9 o'clock in the morning. So it's tough to get up that early, and people are late sometimes. We had one competitor many years ago, when it was still dirt, who was racing a truck in that year, who was late for practice, got to the toll gate, found that it was locked shut. There was nobody there. What's he going to do? The crew, of course, the rest of the crew was already up. They were up in the pits. They were all set up, but the driver wasn't there. He was stuck down at the toll gate. So what did he do? He looked through the toll gate and saw some vans parked there and said, oh, well, let me just go up there and see if any of them have the keys in them. One of them did have keys in it. Thought, well, okay. Nobody's ever going to know. It's 3 o'clock in the morning. I'll drive this van up to the start line, have one of the crew guys or a couple of them take it back down. Yeah, well, they'll have it back down by 3:30. Nobody will be any the wiser. So he did it. He drove the van up there. He got to the paddock, got his crew guys to quick get it back down there. All would have been well. Nobody would have known anything. But when they got back down there. Unfortunately, there was a ranger or some type of official down there who spotted them returning it and busted them. So they found out the whole story of what the driver had done, and as he tells it, he got the riot act read to him. Um, he found out only later that the van had federal plates, so that made it even worse. But he somehow got away with this, and this guy's got a history of getting away with things. This is a legendary guy, and again, he provided a lot of material for the book, Bruce Canepa, and he's a guy who has raced a variety of things up Pikes Peak, everything from open wheelers to big rigs, and had success at every level. So pretty amazing. This is when I went out to see Bruce in California. He's got a great museum, by the way, out south of the Bay Area, and with his collection of cars. And front and center in his collection is one of his open wheel cars from Pikes Peak. And I looked at it, and if you look at this photo, do you notice anything different about this, about the front of this race car? Anything that looks kind of Colorado-ish? You notice all these stone chips?
Lots of dings, yeah.
Yeah, it looks like all of our street cars, right? This is how we get in Colorado. And I said, well, Bruce, what's the deal here? Why do you have all these stone chips on a Pikes Peak car? Because as we all know, in the race and in practice, you're not behind any other cars. You're you're running one at a time. You're theoretically not close enough to each other to get stone chips like this. He said, oh, well, there's a great story behind that, and there's a reason that I haven't repaired those stone chips. He said 1 year, again, this is Bruce, same guy who ran the big rig and got in trouble for stealing the van. Another year that when he was running this car, he got to the end of a practice run and was hanging out with a couple of the unsers, and they said, let's race down. So they did. They raced down the mountain, passing back and forth, and this is how he got all these stone chips on the car. And he said, once again, though, he got busted. They hadn't thought about the fact that there are officials up and down the mountain with radios, and they had called down to the start line and said, these idiots are racing down the mountain. So he got down there. He said, once again, got the riot act read to him, got threatened to get kicked out of the race. But once again, he got away with it. And he said the only way he got away with it this time was that the other two folks he was racing with were named Unser. And so somehow he got a pass again. So talk about a troublemaker, but a great character and a great guy. Bruce is pretty amazing. One of the other legends that when you think about Pikes Peak, you think about at least a lot of people do about a video called Climb Dance. If you haven't seen this, you should go on YouTube and look up Climb Dance. It's an amazing video of Vatanen, who was a World Rally champion and also a Pikes Peak champion, and it's some video that they had done. He said they never did this as really a very commercial thing. They just shot some video of him during some practice runs. And one of the famous things during this practice run, and by the way, this Peugeot that he was running in was insanely fast. This was, I think, about 800 horsepower and incredibly lightweight. And this is on dirt. And as he was going on dirt and driving like a typical rally driver, sawing the steering wheel back and forth, at one point he gets blinded by the rising sun. Like I said, in our practice sessions, we're doing it at first light, and so it's very common that we come around a corner and are completely blinded by the sun. And you don't have sun visors in a race car. So what he did was pulled one hand off the wheel, shielded his face with that hand, and kept sawing the wheel back and forth with one hand, and made it around a couple of corners like this. And he says to this day, he has people come up to him, just random people, and they say, can I get a selfie with you? And he'll say, yeah, sure. And they'll insist that he put his hand up to shield his face. That's what he's famous for. And his quote is, you can raise your hand, but never lift your foot. And I thought that was just hilarious. And very true. This is how he was so successful on Pikes Peak. He's got a lot of great stories too. One thing that kind of emerged that was really surprising to me in talking to a variety of drivers for writing the book, I typically ask them, "What's your biggest fear?" And at least 4 of the drivers I talked to, and these are big name drivers, said their biggest fear was, any guesses?
Not finishing.
Not finishing. That's a good guess. Any others?
Dying.
Dying. It's a good guess too.
Matt says no donuts at the top.
Oh, no, that would be my personal fear, Matt. No, the biggest the fear that came across, and it was totally shocking to me from many big time drivers, was heights. They're terrified of heights. Can you imagine racing up Pikes Peak and being terrified of heights? It was absolutely stunning to me that was the case, but it is. And one of them is actually Bobby Unser, who said, to this day, he said, "I'm terrified of heights. Even though I fly my own plane, I'm terrified of heights." And he says, every year that he would come up to Pikes Peak, and Bobby was really the guy who pioneered practicing before the race, doing what he called tire testing, which is what's going on right now. Actually, a few weeks before the race every year, there is sanctioned tire testing now, but it used to just be something that kind of Bobby started doing. And he said what he would do every year, he had to do this every year, is the first run he would go up there, he would drive very, very slowly right on the edge of the road, where there's all the big drop-offs, but would drive very slowly up there, drive the edge, come back down, and then the next run he'd add a little bit of speed, but still drive right on the edge and get it back up to the top, and just keep doing this and build it up to the point where he could drive as fast as the car would go right on the edge. And he said, I had to reset this every single year because I was no less terrified of heights, in his, I guess in his 30th year than his first. So I thought that was truly amazing. The other one that had an interesting story about that was Bruce Canepa. I showed you the photo of the big rig that he would run in. He said he's terrified of heights, and it was much worse in the big rig because you're up so high you can really see the drop-offs. In a little open wheel car you can't really see a whole lot of what's ahead of you, but in the big rig you sure could. And he said he had his crew cover up a lot of the windshield for him along the bottom, so he couldn't see the stuff down below and see the drop-offs as much. So pretty interesting, I think. One real trend that's come across recently has been a shift to a lot of electric-powered race cars going up Pikes Peak. Electric is very well suited to the peak, and there's been a lot of winners recently, but really electric cars have about a 30-year history on Pikes Peak. It's very well suited. It's a shorter run. Electric motors they don't breathe like you or me, or like an internal combustion engine that needs oxygen. Electric motors don't need oxygen at all, so there's no power loss. We all, in our internal combustion cars, we lose a huge amount of power going up Pikes Peak. In the car that I had run for many years, we calculated it to be about a 40% power loss by the time we got to the summit. And like I said earlier, that's the fast part. You don't want to have a power loss up there. So electric has really taken off, and it's been proven over the last several decades, but really it's taken off more and more recently as a lot of the technology has advanced even more with electric cars, and has become more common. And in fact, it even sucked me in last year. Last year, I ended up taking the 911 RSR that I had run many times previous since 2012, and we actually converted it to electric, which was a different type of thing to do. It still looks like a classic Porsche race car, doesn't it? But underneath the skin, everything about this car was 2019. The car was entered as a 1973 RSR because that's really what the body is and what it looks like. But absolutely everything underneath it was brand new. You can see lots of snow up there as we're going up. And if you're interested, what we ended up doing was put 6 electric motorcycle motors in. This is a view in the back of the car where a Porsche 911 internal combustion engine normally is. And we had 6 motors back there powering the car with a bunch of batteries. These are enormous batteries, 2 of them in the passenger compartment where you would have a passenger seat normally, and then 2 of them in the front trunk, which is normally has a fuel cell, oil reservoir and things like that, things that we don't need anymore with electric, and had those in it. And that was an interesting adventure for me personally to go and convert the car to electric. And the good news is it worked last year. We ended up a 3rd place finish in our class, which was pretty darn good for the first time we had tried this, and we're hoping to bring this car back next year and give it another shot with the electric power plant. So that's kind of the end of my presentation. Mike, do you want to kind of do the pitch on the last couple slides here?
Yeah. Thank you again, Chris. It was a pleasure having you this morning, and love that Porsche 911 RSR. That's a beautiful car. And we also like to thank all our race fans for joining us this morning. And also, if you haven't picked it up yet, we have Chris's book available in the Heritage Center's bookstore. It's the book, The Peak of Racing, and that can be picked up on the Heritage Center's website at ManitouSpringsHeritageCenter.org. So if you haven't seen it yet, pick up The Peak of Racing on our website. We also like to take a moment to thank all the good people at the Pikes Peak Hill Climb Museum and Hall of Fame. They've been with us throughout the programming here during Race Month. If you haven't been over there yet to visit the museum, it's over there at the Broadmoor, and I think you're in for a surprise. So again, thanks again to the Hill Climb Museum and Hall of Fame for joining us during this race season.
Mike?
Yes, Neil.
Yeah, I think let's give people a chance to ask any questions. And then I had an item back in March. I cut out all the build-up and coverage from the 1920 Pikes Peak Hill Climb from the Colorado Springs Evening Telegraph. That race was won by Otto Lusch in a Lexington special. If anyone on the call here has an interest in having those, just send an email to Mantu's heritage@gmail.com and we can make arrangements to get those to you.
All right. Thank you, Neil, for that message. Again, just to remind everyone, race day is August 30th. It'll be broadcast live on Mobile One, the Mobile One app, as well as on KRDO Radio.